Other people asked about some of the acronyms that we use just quickly. ANWR was the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. ANILCA was the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which was from Section 17D2 of ANCSA. And NEPA was
National Environmental Protection.
Yes.
Policy Act.
Yeah.
Which passed just before, the year before Ted and I were elected. And it was a major tool for the environmental community.
Let's see. I have a whole bunch, a long thing of questions. Do you guys want to stick around for these? Go a little longer?
I do, but could I? 72, Bill Egan was a governor. John Havelock was the Attorney General. What was Bill doing in those critical years? What was he thinking?
Hey, I'm not on the panel. Speaking of 72, 79, 80, people our age need to go out there.
Okay. Do you want to take a few minutes break, and does anybody want to come back and address any more of these questions or ask questions from the audience? We can do that now that we're no longer podcasting if we want.
Albert Kaloa offered the money for the oil to the Tyoning people. The check was on the table, and the Indian Affairs man says, okay, we'll take this and we'll administer it for you.
Oh, yeah.
Albert said, no, you won't. And they said, yes, we will. And Albert got up and walked out. And they said, please come back. I'm paraphrasing it, of course, but is that not one of the pivotal moments when there was both finances available for the fight and a sense of native control over what they owned and what they were being paid for? And I think that was a marked change.
And at the time they had a very able lawyer by the name of Stan McCutcheon who litigated that and threatened that, and so there was an accommodation. They could have zeroed in, but I think what the resentment was that the Tyonics were going to fund the AFN beginnings, and that was the awakening.
And the other thing I wanted to say quickly about the shareholder issue is other corporations have done it, have opened their rolls and enrolled new natives. Nana has done it. My children are now shareholders. But there are different requirements, and it requires a vote of the shareholders. And there are other corporations that have not been able to agree because of the potential for diluting of the stock value.
I'd like to just say, I think you state very well the story is untold. Various people have it, and it needs to come together. And I thank Charlie Kinnevel from Point Hope that said our own children don't know the half of what happened and what it has done for us to this day. So I'm sure we've left out a lot of people. I just want to say the leaders that we have for the foresight and the leadership to get us to where we are today, and all the people involved.
I mentioned Oliver Levin.
In relation to that is the panel that we did prior to this was the women behind ANCSA. And that was one of the topics that came up, Francis and others mentioned, was that there were so many people that didn't get mentioned. Some have passed on, but there were so many people who helped in the non-native community, lawyers. Chancey Croft got mentioned. And so there are just so many people, it's hard to bring all these stories together to give credit.
But that's what you're doing with these panels.
Right.
And that's the history.
And thank Irene.
Yeah. Very much.
Who was my slave driver.
And if you don't learn history, you repeat the mistakes over and over again.
Are you going to go, or are you going to come back?
I thought we were taking a break first.
We are. We are. I just want to make sure we're coming back.
Let me remind you.
Senator.
I'm coming. coming. What do you want me to do? Stand next to you. I got it.
Edward Ita. He's right there.
From the Cedar District and from the Alaska Native Community. We give you something to keep you warm.
Thank you. And I need it. Get older. Thank you very much. That's great. My bag, we're getting a lot of voodoo. Great, thank you.
Okay.
If we could, I know some of these guys are getting pretty tired, so we're going to try to wrap this up pretty soon. Gotta put my glasses on. The Federal Field Committee. Somebody tell me about the Federal Field Committee. Your microphone?
What had happened, oops, is it on? Yeah. The Federal Field Committee was very, very important to the process.
I'm sorry, can you take it out in the hall, please? Thank you.
I'm trying to think of the name of the person with the Federal Field Committee.
Was it Joe Fitzgerald?
Joe Fitzgerald. And so their job was to report to Jackson on their findings with respect to the nature of the native land claims. And what they did in their report was extremely significant because it just didn't talk about what the political issues were. It had a whole host of demographic information, cultural information, economic information about how tough things were in rural Alaska. And so it helped make the argumentation for it. And so the Federal Field Committee reported to the entire Congress. And so that was a piece of a wedge, a piece of power that we could use argumentation with senators that weren't totally knowledgeable or House members that weren't totally knowledgeable about the details of it. So the Federal Field Committee played a very important role. A person who later came on my staff who was on the Federal Field Committee is Dr. Jones, Doug Jones, who became my legislative assistant, and he is a PhD economist, and his work was with the Federal Field Committee. That's how he became aware of him and how he came. So the Federal Field Committee was very vital, made a substantial contribution towards bringing the whole issue forward.
How did they get appointed to
the Congress? Jackson, this was a government entity that was created by the Congress, and that wasn't difficult to but we just needed information. The Congress needed information about the status of rural Alaska. Is that anything you want to add on that?
I was just recalling to Jack that I think Esther Warnicki worked on that.
You're darn right she was. She came after, when Fitzgerald left, Esther took it over for a while.
Yeah.
As I recall. Yeah. And then she was an economist that also got involved with the state government.
Mm-hmm. She was one of our natural resources commissioners.
Yeah.
The significance of Egan beating Miller in 1970?
I could go ahead. It was a big surprise. First off, it was Bruce Kendall that talked Bill Egan into running for governor in the primary. They didn't have any money. And if you recall, in 1970, that's when Larry Carr was running for governor, and obviously I felt obligated, and I supported Larry Carr. Bill Egan beat him in the primary, and Bill Egan then won in the general against Keith Miller. As you know, Miller, please, Mayor, Bill Egan, Keith Miller, inherited the position. He didn't win it, and I don't think he had the wherewithal to be a statewide candidate. And so once Egan got by Carr, who had money, and it was a foregone conclusion. Now the results of this were very interesting because you got a person back on track who had gone through a catharsis with respect to the Native community. And so he was a lot more supportive, put areas in place that were very beneficial. When John Havelock left, but But Egan had a problem with the North Slope Borough. And I don't say that in a negative way, it's just that his thinking was different. And when the mayor was talking about the North Slope Borough, and this all ties in, it was, you know, they just approved a borough in Fairbanks, they approved one in Matanuska, but now, because these are Eskimos up there, they couldn't get a borough because they were currying favor with the oil industry. And it was a sad chapter that they had to litigate essentially what everybody else was taking for granted in the Statehood Act. And I don't know if John Rader had a role in that, but John was the authority on the borough legislation when it passed the legislature. Egan was ambivalent, but he played a much more aggressive role in supporting the natives than did the Republicans at the time under Wally Hickel. Does that help? Anyone want to add anything?
Well, the oil industry opposed the creation of the borough. They went up there and lobbied and did everything they could to stop it. I know, because I was up there.
Nellie has asked me to take over temporarily.
What's the significance of Emil Nadi?
Comment on Emil Nadi. Significance.
Emil was the first leader in the AFN. And in a sense, he was significant like Scoop Jackson was significant. The kind of person he was the significance of it. You know, he was what appeared to be a laid-back kind of, he wasn't like his brother, if you knew his brother. But, and I see a couple laughs, somebody knew that. But he was a laid-back kind of personality, one that, you know, when you're in grade school and you have who's going to be class president, and this guy gets to be class president, and he's got nothing else other than the fact he's a natural leader. And that's what Emil was. He was a natural leader, and he didn't threaten people. He didn't make people uncomfortable. You sort of worked with Emil and say, my God, I got to help him more. He's such a nice guy. And that was his great quality. Now, there are other Native leaders that were somewhat acrimonious and got in your face and were confrontational. That can go a long way, but it can be overdone. And that's the reason why Emil was so successful in his tenure. And of course, I had great hopes that he would someday get elected statewide office. He and Willie, you know, ran, and it would have been a great boon to get a native elected to statewide office, and it just did not happen. And that, I think, is a sad situation, because they were very, very qualified, both of them, to occupy any statewide office. So Emil played a very significant role because he was Emil Nadi. I think that's the best way I can say it.
I just like to comment about our friend Emil Nadi. Him and Eben were pretty close too, because Eben was going back and forth too on our behalf, and they became good friends. And Emil passed this one on to me related to ANCSA on their return trip. They were negotiating that number, whatever it first came out to be. And of course there were divisions within our own Native community. And Emil proceeded to tell me that him and Eben, coming back on the airplane, proceeded to hatch out this alternative. And that was to carve up the state into 5 regions. One was basically the southeast, one would be the south central, one would be the north-northwest, and the north slope. Kind of same general ethnic areas, and that almost took traction. And of course I hear what Senator Gravel is saying on the style that Emil had, and that went a long ways, because he could get along with anybody. And even our faction up there, Amo, from what I gathered with my talks, was he'd calm all the fire and brimstone talk coming out, and was a great presence, and I